Welcome to our Take video series on what's happening in Washington as it relates to digital assets. I'm Matt Blumenfeld, a partner in our advisory practice. I lead our global and US digital asset team. I'm joined by Kevin Batteh from Delta Strategies and Keaghan Ames from BGR. And we'll be talking a little bit here about all that's happening in Washington as it relates to regulation, legislation, and the impact it'll have on the broader industry. We'll start off with intros. Kevin, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Keaghan, and then we'll jump right in. So, Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, Matt, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. My name is Kevin Batteh. I am a partner at Washington, D.C. based regulatory strategy and government affairs firm Delta Strategy Group. Our firm primarily focuses on equity and derivative market structure issues, and we represent a variety of both commercial and financial market participants, agriculture companies, energy companies, proprietary traders, asset managers, et cetera. And I believe we have the distinction of being the first firm in Washington, D.C. to lobby on behalf of digital asset market participants or blockchain companies. I started my career as a big law firm lawyer. I've worked as a trial lawyer in the CFTC Division of Enforcement. I've worked for the UK regulator, and I've been here at Delta Strategy Group for over a decade.
Thanks, Kevin. Excited to be chatting with you here. And Keaghan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Keaghan Ames with BGR Group. I'm in our financial services and tax practice. I joined BGR a couple of years ago, coming over from the CFTC. Like Kevin, I worked for acting chair Caroline Pham as her senior policy advisor. Prior to working for the commission, did a number of different jobs, doing regulatory and legislative advocacy, some with foreign banks, one working for a trade association. And prior to all that, I was a PwC alumni working in the PwC advisory group.
Let's jump in here. So it's obviously been an exciting 9 months. It's funny to say that it feels like just yesterday we started on this journey with this new administration. But I would say more has happened in the last 9 months on this topic than probably the last, four to 8 to 10 years. We've seen a tremendous change in attitude towards digital assets. We've seen the world has been flipped on its head as it relates to digital assets. And we're starting to see the technology really perforate through financial services and other, and a lot of that is because of that change in attitude towards regulation and legislation. Obviously, July 18th was a momentous day in the digital asset world. We saw the signing of the Genius Act. It's been in the works for some time, but finally we've got both sides in agreement on many of the clauses, right? We see that the one-to-one reserve backing, we've seen interest in the AML and governance considerations. But let's jump into sort of how the sausage was made and what the conversations were like in Washington to get this done. But also, just your opinions on what's most important around the acts. So, we'll start with you, Keaghan, and then we'll go to Kevin and keep this going. So, Keaghan, if you could tell us a little bit about your experience working through the passing of these acts.
Yeah, I mean, it's to your point, Matt, it's been a complete whirlwind. It's amazing to think that January was just 9 months ago. It feels like 4 years here in DC. This really kicked off right away with the Senate Banking Committee, which has been largely quiet over the last few years, starting with a markup kind of towards the beginning of the year. And that's how you knew, and this was on the heels of President Trump's promises to the digital asset industry. The Congress wasted no time in moving forward. So the Senate had its markup. Chairman Hill on the Financial Services Committee, as well as Chair Thompson on the House Ag Committee, unveiled their plan. And it's sort of been full steam ahead. How we got to where we are has had a lot of windy roads, even in the last 9 months. And you had two different approaches, really. You had the Senate, who always was going to split out the baby, split up the bills with the stablecoin Genius Act, and then sort of the market structure. And the House originally wanted to do a very different approach, which was to combine the bills. And sort of where we've ended up is, again, a compromise that took a full government effort of the Senate, the House, the Treasury Department, the White House, and the regulators all working together to get Genius done and to market structure into the position that it's in right now with the Clarity Act.
Yeah, that's great. And I know you both spent a lot of time, late nights, lots of discussions, and I know you spend most of your time probably with the agencies. Um, did the agencies have a view that you guys were able to incorporate into some of the conversations that you were having, on the Hill and outside the Hill, to get these things done? Kevin, any thoughts on this? And then we'll spend a little bit of time on clarity and sort of the importance of that to everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that on certainly on clarity, I would say the agencies had a view. On Genius Act, I think it was as much about tension between the states and the state regulators and federal regulators, because um, a lot of existing stable coins are state regulated, and a lot of the states that are, especially those that are leaning into crypto, like Wyoming, wanted to make sure there was still a place for state sponsored stable coins. And the Genius Act struck a balance on that, and they allow for some state regulated stable coins as well as federal regulated stable coins, although there's more flexibility, and you can issue a bigger float on the federally regulated stable coins. On clarity, I mean, would it be helpful to do a little bit of the how the sausage? I guess I'd say how the sausage is still being made, because we're not
Yeah, fair
done
enough.
there. Clarity started life as well. It was Fit 21 last Congress, a bill that came out of the House Ag Committee. Um, it was a joint work product between the House Ag Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. The Senate had not really done much on market structure, and the House was taking the lead. And if you think about digital asset market structure, you're really talking about the jurisdiction of two federal agencies, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission. So those two agencies were going to have a role. And so those two committees of Congress, which have oversight jurisdiction of those two agencies, were the ones that initiated the drafting. And something that you don't see very often, what that we saw with Fit 21 and then again with Clarity this Congress, was those two committees, House Ag and House Financial Services, working together hand in hand, at least on the Republican majority side. And so they put together a work product that was sort of addressed both sides of the House, no pun intended, but the SEC and the CFTC provisions that would regulate or that would legislate how both digital asset commodities and digital asset securities would be regulated. They passed Fit 21 last Congress. They went back, revised it, and I'd say improved it substantially from last Congress, and passed it again in the House this Congress. The Senate is now working on some sort of market structure legislation that would potentially be conferenced or negotiated with Clarity to get a final bill. But the Senate to date has not introduced anything. There's been a discussion draft put out by the SEC, or excuse me, by the Senate Banking Committee, which is the committee that has oversight jurisdiction of the SEC. And then there's also a draft being put together by the Senate Ag Committee, which would cover the CFTC titles. I think the biggest difference or distinction between the House work process and the Senate work process is that unlike the House, where the two committees worked hand in hand, on the Senate side, the two committees, and again, we're talking about the Republicans because they have the majority, so they're taking the lead. Those two committees are not working hand in hand. They're working in parallel. They have agreed that they're going to, the Banking Committee is going to cover the security side of this legislation. Ag Committee is going to cover the commodity side, but they're not talking yet. Once they complete their work products, I assume that they will try to coordinate them so that they kind of fit together.
Yeah, that's a great overview. And, historically, I think we've seen, this work in parallel, but maybe not as collaboratively. And I say collaboratively from the sense that we believe that they'll largely be similar enough that we can work through the differences and changes. Um, I want to just go back to one thing you said about the Genius Act and sort of the state versus federal component of it, because I think that's something that often gets overlooked, right? The states have historically been years ahead of the federal government from a legislation standpoint or a regulation standpoint on the topic of stablecoin. And I think that's the importance of the Genius Act. We've now uh, provided that regulatory framework. And it's the same thing that we're seeking to get out of the Clarity Act, in the sense that the biggest challenge that I've heard from my position from clients is been, we don't have a clarity as to what is a security, what's not a security. And that was one of the first things that the SEC really did when they came into this new regime, if you will, for the SEC. They've stated sort of the intent of what they're hoping to accomplish over the first 6 months, and they've really focused on that security component. And the CFTC has always had a strong view on this as well, and so it's good to see that this is going to come out of the Clarity Act, hopefully. Keaghan, I know you also spent some time at the CFTC. We just wanted to get your view on the Clarity Act as well, and sort of what you're seeing, in addition to the great insight that Kevin provided.
Yeah, no, and just to kind of follow up on Kevin's point, the House, from their perspective of working together, the Ag Committee and the Financial Services Committee, it's worth underscoring that that's a very tall task to get two committees to like split the baby and work close together. Not since like Title VII of Dodd-Frank had committees work that closely with one another. So it's no small undertaking. But yeah, I mean, the existential question's always been, how do you define what's in what jurisdiction, what's a security, and what's a commodity? I think that where Clarity landed, by and large, with respect to the tests that help determine what that is, we're in as good a position as we could be with legislation and not allowing left up to the courts to use the Howey test to do it. I think that certainty and that there's at least, no pun intended, clarity with respect to that legislation. The House side has also had the benefit, as Kevin pointed out, of going through this process in the last Congress with Fit 21. So that's why you're able to get bipartisan support, because there was education of new members and there was already a precedent for how this bill would work itself out with respect to splitting jurisdiction, and made it much easier to get, I think, the 72 or 78 Democrats that you needed to get bipartisan support. As far as the role the agencies are playing, I mean, you most see this through technical assistance, through TA, and it's really through the SEC or the CFTC or whatever regulatory body is going to be on the receiving end of this new authority. They provide technical advice as to how you implement and how their jurisdiction would fit in. So it's been no surprise, both with the leadership of the SEC, with the new founded SEC Crypto Task Force, and then with some of the brain trust that's left at the CFTC, that they have opinions and they have thoughts on how they could actually implement a bill should it get signed into law.
Yeah, and I definitely want to hit on the agencies a little bit more, but just want to bring it back to the Clarity Act. So we've passed the House, the Senate is doing their work now. Um, let's assume that Clarity gets passed in the next 6 months. Obviously, it will have huge implications for the market and the banks, the fintechs, across the board, the market in general, the industry. What comes next after that? Where are we going to be, call it 12 months from now, assuming we have a Clarity Act, and it probably will look very different than it does today, but somewhat similar, if not very similar. Where do we end up in 6 months? Obviously, you just mentioned the White House crypto report. It didn't say that much more than what we've seen from some of the other reports coming out of the White House or the agencies. But where do we end up? So, Kevin, let's start with you, and then we'll go back to you, Keaghan.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of this, Matt, you said this has been a really whirlwind, busy time. I think the last time I remember things being this crazy busy was during Dodd-Frank implementation. I was counsel to a CFTC commissioner when we were writing all the rules for Dodd-Frank. And as busy as this has been, again, it has been, can't understate how busy Washington has been in the last 9 months. When, we've got Genius Act passed, and if we were to have clarity done and dusted, and we can talk about what that looks like, then these agencies will go into rule writing mode. And that will be a whole nother level of busy, depending on what you like. But there are so many rules that will have to be written, both for Genius and Clarity. And I know, because I've talked to these legislators and their staff, the goal has been to get this done with as little rule writing as possible, because the drafters know that the administration is going to change at some point. And if the rules are not written in this current administration, there's less likelihood that they will be written in a way that this current administration likes. So there's going to be a real push to get all the rules that are required to be written pursuant to this legislation done quickly. So I think there'll be a lot of public rulemaking, notice comment periods, and the industry will have to roll up its sleeves and really focus. As you guys know, and I'm sure most of your viewers know, Congress sets the high level. Here's what we want you to do. It's up to the agencies to really flesh it out with the rules. And so they're critical. Getting them right is critical.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned Dodd-Frank. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I was there living that as well for
Yeah.
my time at NFA when we were supporting the CEFs during all that. And I can tell you that the rulemaking is more important, I would say, than the congressional legislation that states how to go about writing those rules. But that's just my own opinion. It does take an army to get those rules written, and input from the industry as a whole. Kevin, I know Keaghan, I know you experienced that as well, from your time at the CFTC, and seeing that. So I don't know if you want to share anything about what your vision or what you believe the next 6 months after clarity.
No, I think Kevin hit it. The only thing I'd add is, this is going to be a lot of cross jurisdictional discussion as well. Like, obviously, the bill outlines the regulatory responsibilities, the jurisdiction, but we're talking about an entire market, right? You're talking about like different aspects of the marketplace, and that's going to require cross agency coordination. So, even if the SEC has its jurisdiction, the CFTC has its jurisdiction, these markets work in parallel and cross all the time. So, that's why I think, there's going to be a role for Treasury, and it already has sort of that mandate with the FSOC, but it kind of coordinates among these agencies. So there's going to be that. There's going to be a role for educating and continuing to keep up with the banking regulators. So, I totally agree with Kevin that, they're going to try to walk the line of, having good rules in place that will allow these markets to have that regulatory clarity without it being so overly burdensome that it takes 10 years to implement, like
Yeah.
Dodd-Frank. And then other administrations will get a slice at it. But they also need to continue to keep their counterparts at the Treasury and the other regulators, appraised, or like in line with what's happening.
Well, and you mentioned the banking regulators, so I want to pull us back to Genius for one more second here. Obviously, the OCC has a bit ahead of them. One of the criticisms recently has been around yield on stablecoins, and how that was described in the Genius Act, and what's the future may look like for yield. What other criticisms are you guys hearing on either side of the aisle, right? Kevin, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Broadly speaking, the Genius Act prohibits issuers of stablecoins from paying yield or interest on the stablecoins. What we've heard from some folks in the banking community is a concern that some non-issuers may try to, or may make some kind of a indirect payment, a yield payment. So someone like an exchange might who's holding a lot of these stable coins, may be inclined to pay a yield to a customer. And the concerns are that that leads to and potentially higher yields than, say, a bank would pay. So the concerns from the banks that we've heard are that there could be a flight of deposits from the banks to Coinbase or Crypto.com or some of those types. And the biggest criticism I've heard is that that's bad for the banks, and that probably is bad for the banks. But I don't know, I query whether that's bad for the the American people if they're able to get a higher yield. And of course there's other issues, but that's the one that I've heard the most.
Yeah. And certainly, this is all in the spirit of innovation. And if something like that does occur, it just forces all participants to think about innovation and do what's best for the consumer. Keegan, anything you want to add or um,
No, I think that's been the largest criticism that Kevin just hit on. The only other thing I'd add is I think that there's a lot of confusion, and some of this is just the art of advocacy messaging by some in DC of comparing this tantamount to like the Silicon Valley Bank, and like if there was a run and what would happen, and we need stability, and I think that a lot of that messaging played out and was sort of addressed and kind of not dismissed, but I think there's some understanding about why this would not lead to another Silicon Valley Bank. I think all the misconceptions around that have been cleared up. But in moments like this, when there's innovation, people always harken back to previous disasters and what could happen, and they try to not repeat history. But I think that we're in a very good spot with the administration, with the regulators, on kind of making sure that there's no convoluted messaging there.
yeah, I think you can view this as an opportunity to improve the different products that are out there. And many banks are doing so with the tokenized deposit and adding additional features and value to the traditional deposit that then can compete or cooperate with stablecoins, right? This doesn't have to be an or, it could be an and type of conversation for banks and other institutions. Um, so let's go back to the agencies. I think that we were really getting to something there, and pulled us away just to finish off the other conversation. But obviously, we're seeing a lot of change at both agencies, or maybe we've seen all the change we're going to see at one of the agencies, and some of the other agencies are still figuring that out. Um, and let's start there, I guess. So what do we think happens with the CFTC at this current point in time? We have an acting chair. We don't have somebody who's been appointed at this point in time, and we're still going through that process. So what can we expect in the meantime, and where do we end up? Kevin, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, wow. The CFTC, I've either worked at the agency or advocated before them for at least 2 decades, and I've never seen morale this low at the agency. And it's it's a shell of its former self, and that's for a few reasons. They've lost a lot of employees. They're down to just 2 commissioners, and there'll be 1 commissioner this week. And so the agency is never as effective as it can be when it doesn't have a full complement of commissioners. So everybody's left. We don't have a Senate confirmed chairman. We have an acting chair, Commissioner Pham. And so, morale is low, and we're still waiting to find out if the president's nominee, Brian Quintens, will get confirmed. Brian was previously served as a commissioner. He then worked at, he did a few things, but he most recently A16Z and Kalshi. He was on the board of Kalshi, a CFTC regulated prediction market. Was nominated, seemed to have a good wind at his back. And then on the eve of his Senate Ag Committee vote, he needed to get a vote out of the committee and then a vote of the full Senate to get confirmed to be the chairman. On the eve of that, we understand that Tyler Winklevoss of the Winklevoss twins that run Gemini, a digital asset exchange, called the president and said, "This is not our guy." And that set some things in motion, and there was some back and forth. And at this stage, it's sort of, I guess I'd say he's in limbo because he's got supporters on both sides calling the president saying, we want this guy, we don't want this guy. So he's in a bit of a holding pattern. Meanwhile, at the agency, Carolyn Pham, who Keaghan knows very well, we all know well, but Keaghan knows very well, is there holding down the fort as the acting chair, but she has said she's going to leave. Well, sorry, she said she's put out a press release saying she will leave once Trump's nominee is confirmed and in place. Though there's been rumors and speculation that she may be taking another job out, a private sector job again. So, not a great time for the agency, and just sort of there's not a lot of stability there.
Yeah, it's something I haven't seen at the agency as long as I've been in the space. So the financial services space, that is. But Keaghan, anything you want to add? You obviously have several relationships at the CFTC as well.
Yeah, I think Kevin covered the current landscape very well. I mean, I think the shame of this is to Kevin's point, we have, the president and, his advisors. Far be it from me to question what they do, but someone like Brian at this point, with the morale at the CFTC where it is, with like so many new innovative markets that the CFTC is being asked to lead on, Brian's an ideal candidate. Like, Brian checks a lot of those boxes. He has direct industry experience. He's been in the building. He's been a trusted confidant and someone that you can go to from our clients' perspectives. He may not agree with you all the time, but that's his job as a policymaker, is to balance those things. And, we're at a time now when the CFTC is about to, potentially get new jurisdiction in digital assets. And they're dealing with prediction markets and the boom in prediction markets. You need someone there like Brian that has that experience and those capabilities. And more importantly, someone that's Senate confirmed, someone that has that role and has been given the green light by the Senate to kind of carry out that on behalf of the president and the administration. And I don't want to front end it, Matt, but you juxtaposition that with what the SEC is, where it's got Chair Atkins, it's got two Republican commissioners. I think, I agree with Kevin's point, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it would be nice to have a balanced commission and have all those viewpoints represented. But you also have, it's staffed up. It has the crypto task force. Staff continues to roll in. And they're a bit more prepared at the staff level to move forward with that authority. And I think a concern from many in the industry is that what's going to happen with the CFTC. And that's a lingering question on the eve of the Senate taking up, its market structure package.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought it back to the SEC, because that's where I was heading anyway. But we've seen a very different approach between the two agencies, over the last 6-ish months, or nine months, I guess. I was very impressed with how fast the SEC has moved to change some of its attitude towards this industry. I spent some time in Washington at the roundtables. Was impressed by the group that they brought in to help educate and discuss these topics. And then there was actual action on the back of it. And so we've seen that a very effective approach from the SEC. And again, not every SEC commissioner agrees with every single point that's being made. There is discussion happening, and things are moving forward. We've seen tokenized stock become somewhat prevalent across various exchanges in the space, pushing that forward. We've seen the conversation around tokenization moving forward. We've seen the concept of the digital twin, or the parallel ledger being discussed, where now you may start seeing things move on chain more so than they have in the past. Is there anything you guys want to highlight on the SEC front beyond what you guys have already said. Keegan, I'll give you the opportunity first.
No, I think, I mean, holistically, the SEC is looking at innovating. So I think that's number one. And and they've done a good job, especially while Chair Atkins was going through the nomination process, of letting go of some of the enforcement actions that had no merit, that were stemmed and kind of tanking parts of the industry. But two, I think that they feel, and they've Chair Atkins, Commissioner Peirce, Commissioner Ueda have said this, that there's a lot of things they can do absent statutory language that they can work on right now. And some of that's no action relief. Some of that's allowing for staff guidance on how to build this ecosystem. But with so much movement and change, there is going to be some natural tension that we've seen between traditional actors and digital asset actors moving in this space. So that, I think, is kind of where one big area where the SEC is navigating their existing registrants versus new players in the space.
And I think a lot of that is healthy for the space, right? I think you need to have honest conversations that go deeper than just looking at asset prices and just looking at certain protections. I think having a well-rounded conversation is important. And again, this has been a unique year for Washington. The approach that's been taken by this administration to the agencies and sort of the influence. Are we at all worried about how we move forward? This administration has another three plus years left. How do we view independence as we move forward here from an agency perspective? Kevin, any thoughts?
Yeah, look, this has been an unprecedented time in sort of the role of the executive. As we learn, in law school, the administrative agencies are a function of the executive branch, but there's congressional oversight of them. This administration, the president has, through executive order and other actions, really amalgamated a lot and centralized a lot of power over the independent federal regulatory agencies. And there's even been executive orders about the the independent agencies. And the president has put a White House liaison in each of the federal agencies. He is not nominated any Democrats to the bipartisan commissions like the CFTC or the SEC, and there's the whole alphabet soup of federal agencies outside of the scope of what we're talking about today. And if I know this was the case a month ago, and I believe it's still the case, he's not appointed any commissioners he's not nominated any agency commissioners other than the chairman of the agency. So like the CFTC or the SEC typically have two Republicans, two Democrats, and then a chair, which is the party of the president. So what you're seeing is a very big centralization of power in the executive. And I think, we represent a lot of companies, crypto companies, traditional companies, who currently like the regulatory environment we're in, right? We're very pro-business. We are no longer, doing regulation by enforcement in the digital asset space and other areas. So that's great. And we're seeing a lot of people come into the country that were waiting on the sidelines. And so, to the extent we want to bring more business here, that it's working, at least from where I sit and what I see. But there's always the other shoe that's going to drop. And what rarely do you see one administration make progress in consolidating executive power, and then the next administration, giving that power up. So what I think we may see, every time there's an administration change, the regulatory pendulum swings a little bit, to the left, a little bit to the right. And You get maybe a little more pro enforcement, a little more pro business, but the swings aren't huge. I think under this administration, we're seeing a big swing one way, and my concern would be that under the next administration, you could see a big swing the other way, and it looks more like a parliamentary um, government system where there's big changes each time there's an election, and that volatility is not good for business over the long haul.
Yeah, you're totally right there, and I think to your earlier point, it's been effective for moving the space forward, and we certainly uh, have seen a lot of interesting products, a lot of innovation happening that was sitting on the sideline waiting. I remember having conversations pre-January with certain clients about the space, and they said, "Well, whatever happens in January will determine whether or not I'm in the U.S. or not." And we've certainly seen those companies come to the U.S. So you're absolutely right. But to the counterpoint, this huge swing back in the other direction would be tremendously detrimental to the space. And sorry, finish your thought. And
No, I was just saying, my
continue.
hope is that these companies come in, they build, they get traction, they are demonstrating value so that it's a little harder for the next
100%.
administration to, you're not going to kill thriving businesses. And the other piece of this, at least, I was talking about crypto, but also just more broadly with respect to digital assets.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be harder because the digital asset industry, and I've been following this since 2013. It's grown and it's gotten so much more mature and it's gotten smarter in how it interacts with Washington. So this last election cycle, right, all that money that came in from digital asset companies, that sent a message to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. So I don't think anybody's going to just totally undo the gains that were made here because there are political consequences. There didn't used to be
Yeah.
political consequences for being anti-crypto. There are now.
100%. And the biggest question I was getting asked pre-Genius was, so are digital assets real? Are they here to stay? And now that you have law, it's hard to argue any other way. Yes, things will change with the new administration. And Keegan, I know you have opinions on this as well, so I'll give you an opportunity here.
Well, and I was just going to highlight and following up on what you and Kevin were both saying. I mean, there are going to be other opportunities, and we haven't seen this from President Trump and this administration yet. But and not to get very politically nerdy here, but we're going to have other opportunities where you're going to need bipartisan support, and you're looking at government funding at the end of this month, the National Defense Authorization Act. There's going to be things where he's going to need Democrats. Now, I'm not sure where nominations for independent agencies fall in, like, Chuck Schumer, who leads the Senate minority, where that's going to fall. But there are going to be areas where they can be compromised. And I think a lot of people that are nerds and follow the financial regulatory agencies and their independence closely are hoping that those could be areas where you start negotiating, you get a full commission, because the full commissions are really what's helpful for clients, where you have, buy-in from both sides. There's at least some buy into the process. So I think that's one of our hopes, but just to echo everything you said as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. What we've seen has worked in the past here. Will it continue to work for the rest of the administration is still to be seen. Well, look, I could spend the next couple hours continuing this conversation, but I think I'm being told we have to wrap. So just wanted to say thank you to Kevin from Delta Strategies and Keegan from BGR for being with us here today to unravel a little bit of what's happening in the space, especially in Washington, and understanding how it's all coming together. So I just wanted to say thank you to you both, and feel free to reach out to these guys or myself if you have further questions. But thanks for joining us here on the Our Take special edition on crypto and what's happening in Washington. Until next time.